Good afternoon, and thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Dr. Sarah Abosh Jacobson. I am the Barbara Rabin Chief Education Officer here at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And this will be our final 2025 Summer Survivor Speaker Series talk. And I think you are in for a treat this afternoon. You're going to be hearing from second-generation survivor Ron Schwarz. He is the son of Holocaust survivor Charles Schwarz of blessed memory. As a child during the war, Charles was hidden by the, pardon my poor French, the Oeuvre de Secours aux Enfants, or OSE, a Jewish aid organization based in Paris. Through a very risky border crossing, Charles escaped to Switzerland, but I'll let Ron share the rest of the story with you. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Summer Survivor Speaker Series, and there's quite a few of them. We've been very lucky this summer. Anti-Defamation League of Texoma, ADL, Dallas After School, Green Hills School, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, Southwest Jewish Congress, Texas Holocaust Genocide and Anti-Semitism Advisory Commission, and the Legacy Senior Communities. We are grateful for your support of the museum and our programs. I would also like to extend a very special welcome to our board members, generations, and volunteers in the audience. We couldn't fulfill our mission without you, and we appreciate all that you do. If you are interested in becoming a museum member or a volunteer, please visit our website at dhhrm.org to learn more. In just a moment, Ron will share his story and his father's story with you. Then we will have time for questions and answers. If you are joining us in person today, you should have received a little golf pencil and an index card on your way in, and you can write any questions that you might have on that. And staff will be around at the end of Ron's talk to pick those up so we can ask those questions of him. If you are joining us virtually, please use the Q&A function that's at the bottom of your screen to go ahead and submit your questions, and we will filter those in as well. I now ask you to silence your cell phones. For those of you who don't know how to do that, turn to the youngster next to you. They will show you how to do that. And please also refrain from recording the presentation. We are recording it as we speak, and it will be on our YouTube channel, so the museum's YouTube channel, in a few days, so you can watch it again if you would like to do so. It is now my great pleasure to turn things over to Ron Schwarz.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, your French ain't bad. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Usually when I speak at the museum, I'm speaking to a school group that's on a field trip. They come through, they see the museum, they go through the exhibits, and then it ends with a talk by someone like myself. And they're kind of captive. They don't really have a choice, but they kind of have to be there, go where their teachers tell them. But y'all are here under your own volition, so thank you so much. It means a lot. So today I'm going to tell you a story. Sarah gave you a little bit of an introduction. The story's mainly about my father, what it was like for him as a Jewish kid growing up in Germany in the 1930s, and how he ended up surviving the war. And a little bit about my grandparents, who obviously were older, had a very different experience, but a little bit about how they endured the Nazis. And spoiler alert, they also survived the war. So for me, the story begins, I can't believe it's 100 years ago now, in 1925 in Ludwigshafen, Germany. Ludwigshafen is about 70 miles south of Frankfurt. And in the mid-20s, it's a really growing city. Germany's starting to recover nicely from World War I. There's a lot of manufacturing, and they're exporting products. And a lot of young people are moving to Ludwigshafen. It has a small but vibrant Jewish community. There's about 1,400 Jews living in Ludwigshafen, big enough for Ludwigshafen to have a synagogue. So the picture on the top left is a picture from the 1920s of the synagogue in Ludwigshafen. That's the outside. And the top right is the inside of the synagogue. My grandparents, they owned a jewelry store in Ludwigshafen. There's a picture of the street, the Prinz-Regentenstrasse. And if you see that building on the right side, that clock, that's where the jewelry store was. And that building isn't there anymore. But right across the street is where they lived, on the second floor of an apartment building. You can kind of see a little bit the outline of those bay windows, and that's where they lived. So in the beginning of 1926, my grandmother, who at the time is in the maternity ward, giving birth to my father, this ex-employee comes into the jewelry store to talk to my grandfather. He used to work there, and he's talking to him about coming back to work. Apparently, they have a conversation, and they agree the guy will come back to work next Monday. He then takes out a gun, shoots my grandfather in the chest, killing him, shoots 2 other employees who were out and about, but they were just superficial wounds, and then turned the gun on himself and killed himself. My grandmother, she's 25 years old. She's in the maternity ward. She has an 8-day-old baby boy. Her husband's just been killed, and she has a jewelry store to run. I can't even imagine what that was like for her. We never really talked about it. This slide, this is the newspaper article from the Ludwigshafen newspaper the next day. And the headline, a terrible bloody act, 2 dead and 2 injured on Prinz-Regentenstrasse. But life goes on. 3 years later, my grandmother remarried. She met Oscar Schwarz. I don't know a lot about how they met. My mother always told me that the marriage was kind of arranged. Everybody wanted my grandmother to remarry. And my mother always told me that they kind of made a deal, like marry this woman, adopt the kid, my father, and you'll get the jewelry store to run. And I don't know how well informed my mother was, but it did kind of make sense. And but they got married, and I knew them, and they stayed married until they both died. This slide, this is an address book from Ludwigshafen from the 1930s, and I don't know how well you can read that German script where that red arrow is. That's the entry from my grandfather. It says Oscar KFM, which is an abbreviation for Kaufmann. It means businessman in German, and then the address, Prinz-Regentenstrasse 65. So things are good in Germany, but maybe underlying all that, maybe not so good for Jews. Let's listen to my father talk a little bit about growing up and going to school.
In the, I don't know about the first year, but certainly in the second, third year, and beyond that, there was a lot of anti-Semitism in the school. In other words, the kids called me Saujude, which is German for Jew pig. And I remember that the teacher really didn't take any action. I mean, he was not openly antagonistic towards me, but he certainly made no attempt whatsoever to curb the other children.
So that's my dad. He's a cute little nugget, don't you think? Raise your hand if you think he has an accent. Everybody always laughs when I ask that. My father used to say, everybody tells me I have an accent, but I didn't have an accent until I came to this country. I think what's important about what he said, so he's talking about anti-Semitism and hate against Jews. This is before Hitler ever comes into power. So, right, Hitler didn't invent anti-Semitism. It's been around for a long time. In 1933, Hitler comes to power, and I think it's important to note that he came to power by purely legal and legitimate means. There was no coup d'etat, there was no military takeover. It was legal and legitimate. Once he got into power, he consolidated power very quickly, and he did do a lot of corrupt things to do that and make that happen. To understand the appeal of a Hitler, because we look at the kind of guy he was, it's hard to understand. But at this point, you have to understand what's happening now in Germany economically. So I told you in the mid-20s, Germany's doing kind of well. They're recovering from World War I nicely. By 1933, the situation had completely changed. And the catalyst for it was really the Depression here in America in 1929. So the US had loaned Germany a lot of money after World War I to rebuild. Things were so bad here, the United States demanded repayment of the loans. Germany didn't have the cash to repay the loans, so they just started printing currency and printing currency. And when you do that, you introduce inflation into the economy, and there was hyperinflation in Germany. Like, people would tell stories about sitting at a restaurant having a meal, and while they were sitting there, the prices were increasing. So huge inflation, huge unemployment, and what Hitler said was, Hitler said two things. I'm going to take care of this inflation, and I'm going to rebuild Germany. There's going to be jobs for everybody, and we're going to create these jobs by rebuilding our military, which he did. And the other thing he said was, the reason you don't have anything is because they have it. And he pointed to the Jews. And things were so bad in Germany, it was very convenient and easy and appealing to have a scapegoat. So fast forward 2 years to 1935, Germany passes the Nuremberg Laws. The Nuremberg Laws were for the protection of German blood and honor, and it imposed all kinds of restrictions on the Jews. For example, if you were Jewish and born in Germany, they took away your citizenship. Even if you were born and raised there, you were no longer a German citizen, you were stateless. Jews couldn't be officers in the military. You weren't allowed to quote legal opinions by Jewish scholars in court. Jewish businesses had to paint a yellow star on their shop windows to identify them as being Jewish. There was no intermarrying between Jews and Germans. Anyway, a whole host of restrictions that really impacted Jews in Germany. The slide shows, this is the front page of the New York Times from 1935, and that headline that is circled in red, Reich puts laws on Jews in force. The reason I include that is I think it's important to, this is the New York Times, so the world knows this is happening, right? The information about this is not isolated to some small corner of Germany. The world knows. Let's listen to my father talk a little bit about the Nuremberg Laws and how it affected them.
In the meantime, additional decrees came out limiting the movement of Jews. For instance, I recall we couldn't go anymore to the park where we used to go because the benches in the park had signs, no Jews are allowed. It was difficult to travel because hotels had signs, no dogs and no Jews. As a side comment, after World War II, the Germans liked to go to the shore in Holland, and since the Dutch had suffered quite a bit under the German occupation, the hotels on the shore in Holland had signs, no dogs and no Germans.
You could tell my father loved that story. Like, you could hear him giggle at the end. He used to, we'd be in the car going to his parents for lunch on Sunday, and he would just tell that little story, and then he would start laughing. He really enjoyed it. I think what's interesting about what he said, he started out, additional decrees were coming all the time. When it was all said and done, the Germans passed 400 decrees restricting and affecting Jewish life in Germany. And that was just at the federal level. In addition to that, individual municipalities passed their own decrees. So fast forward 3 years to 1938, Kristallnacht happens. Kristallnacht means the night of the broken glass. And what happened was you had German civilians, not military. They broke into Jewish homes, broke down the doors, trashed the furniture, stole personal effects, beat people up. They broke shop windows of Jewish businesses, broke into the stores, trashed the place, also stole merchandise, again, beat people up. They burned down all the synagogues in Germany, and this picture in the middle, that's that same synagogue I showed you in the earlier slide, and you can see the smoke coming out of it. They also destroyed all the Jewish cemeteries in Germany. So they took up all the headstones and they collected them and they repurposed the headstones to be used as like cobblestones on the streets. And if you go to some of these Jewish cemeteries today that were destroyed, it just looks, there are people buried there, but you wouldn't know. It just looks like an overgrown forest. They arrested about 30,000 Jews. They sent them to Dachau. The picture on the top right is a picture from Dachau waiting for, with all these people waiting to be taken in and registered. This was really the first time that Jews were arrested for not committing any crime. They were arrested just for being Jewish. My grandfather was picked up and arrested, and we're going to listen to my father talk about that in a second. But the slide on the top left, front page of the Dallas Morning News from November 1938, hysterical Nazis wrecked thousands of Jewish shops, burned synagogues, and wild orgy of looting and terror. Again, the knowledge of this isn't isolated to some small corner of Germany. It's the Dallas Morning News. The world knows this is going on. Let's listen to my dad talk about Kristallnacht.
We were spared. They never came to our apartment, nor did they destroy the store. And they told my parents later on that since we had a jewelry store and there was a lot of gold in there, that they considered that to be state property, and therefore it was not their intention of destroying it. They picked up my dad, and for several days we didn't really know where he had been sent to. My mother went to the Gestapo office every day to find out what the status was, and I gather they were civil to her, and she finally found out that he had been sent to Dachau.
So if you don't know, Dachau is a concentration camp. It's 15-20 minutes just outside of Munich. And my grandfather was sent there, and then he got released he spent about 7 or 8 weeks, and they released him and he came home. And if you're thinking, wait a minute, I didn't know anyone ever got released from a concentration camp. And that was very true by 1942. But in 1938, Dachau was more of a prison for political opponents, undesirables, Jews, homosexuals. It wasn't yet what it would have become during the war. So he comes home, and there's this other decree by the Germans. It's a name change requirement. If you were Jewish, if you were a man, you were required to legally change your name. You had to add the name Israel to your name. So my grandfather, Oscar Schwarz, is now Oscar Israel Schwarz. Women had to add Sarah to their name. My grandmother, Therese Schwarz, is now Therese Sarah Schwarz. The document in the middle is my grandparents' marriage certificate. And those two notations on the right side were not part of the original marriage certificate. It got added after. And what it says, the top block in red is about my grandfather, the bottom one is about my grandmother, and it basically says he's changed his name and has added Israel to his name, and that's his legal name. So I have wondered why the Nazis would do this. The obvious reason is to identify Jews as Jews. If you say I'm Oscar Israel, then everyone knows you're Jewish. And maybe that's part of the reason, but they were already forced to wear yellow stars, so they were already identified as Jews. And as I've thought about it, I think it goes a lot deeper than that. Names are really, really important in Jewish history. So we name our babies after dead relatives to remember them and to honor them. My grandson is Gavin Charles Schwarz. Charles was my father's name, so he's named after him. The Old Testament, and I'm going to go out on a limb here because I'm not a biblical scholar, says something like, if you remember a name, you will remember the person. And so names are really important, and doing this and messing with this, for me, it's a dagger in the heart of literally thousands of years of Jewish tradition and culture, and I think that's why they did it, why the Nazis did it, to say, no, it's not important to us. My grandfather gets this letter in February of 1939, and it's at the top, and that paragraph that's broken out, I know it's in German, but it says, elimination of Jews from German economic life. So this letter goes on to explain, and this letter is from the equivalent of the mayor's office in Ludwigshafen. And the letter goes on to say that you are not allowed to be in business anymore. You're not allowed to engage in trade. So do an inventory of your jewelry store, and then you have to shut down the store. And this was true. This was another decree that Jews, they were not allowed to be in business in Germany. So my grandfather does the inventory. It's about 15 pages. I have it. He lists out every item and what he thinks the value is. And then the Nazis brought in their own appraiser, and that's the letter at the bottom, this guy Richard Albrecht. And he said, no, I don't agree with his valuation. He says it's this, I think it's this. But that's not the reason I include this letter. The reason I included in the bottom, where he signed it, it's signed Heil Hitler. And it makes perfect sense he would do that. The guy was a Nazi, that's what they did. But in all the research I've done, I've probably read through thousands of pages of documents. Nothing resonated with me the way that did when I saw that. It was just, we've seen it in movies and read it in books, but when I saw it here in a personal letter to about my family, it just, I had a visceral reaction to it. So my grandfather didn't shut down the jewelry store. He found a buyer for it. The Nazis approved the sale. And in the bottom right, that's a paragraph from the sales contract. And it says that the money is to be paid on the blocked account of the German State Bank in Ludwigshafen. So what does that mean? It means the people that bought the business paid the money, but it was blocked. My grandparents never got the money. It was basically stolen by the Nazis. And that was very, very typical with businesses that were seized by the Nazis from the Jews. So I want you to get the sense of the increasing level of seriousness and danger here. So we start out, and you hear my father talking about, there's name calling, right? He's being called Jew pig. And then we get to the Nuremberg laws, so we have legislation affecting Jewish life in Germany. Then you get to Kristallnacht, you've got physical violence and incarceration of Jews, and now you're basically impoverishing Jews. You're preventing them from earning a living. So at some point along this spectrum of events, it's become really clear to people that Germany was not safe for Jews. they're trying to get out, and if they can't get out, they're trying to get their kids out, and then they'll to save the kids, and they'll try to get out later. So arrangements are made for my father to go to Paris. He comes home from school one day, and his parents tell him that he's going to Paris tomorrow. They're not going with him, and he's 13 years old. He's going alone, and he doesn't speak any French. Let's listen to my father talk about that.
1939, I was taken to the railroad station, and with a group of 100, maybe 200 kids, we took the train for Paris. When we got to Paris, originally, we were sent to the Rothschild hospital because apparently they had enough rooms and beds available to accommodate everybody, and there we were sorted out and sent to various children hostels. I was sent to a place called Chateau de la Guette, which was about 50 miles east of Paris. It was, I don't know whether it was owned by the Rothschilds or whether they had rented it, but we were 136 kids, all from Germany and Austria. We were very well taken care of there. In other words, we had nice accommodations. We were adequately fed.
So, okay, whenever I watch this clip, I'm really affected. He starts out on March 13th, 1939. Like that date, he knows that date. It's like imprinted on his brain, and that always strikes me. And if it's not enough to know that this was a traumatic experience for him, just based on the facts, like there's something about him knowing that date so intimately that tells that. I just want you to think about being 13 years old, being sent off alone to a foreign country, not speaking the language, your parents aren't going with you, you don't know if you're ever going to see them again. And what it was like for his parents to put him on that train. They did end up getting out a few months later, but they didn't know if they would get out. So they also didn't know if they'd ever see him again. But so this just had to be an incredibly difficult decision and situation. The Rothschilds, if you don't know who the Rothschilds were, they were a wealthy Jewish family in France. They made their money through banking and finance. And by 1939, they had almost all left and emigrated to the US, but they left a lot of money behind to take care of Jewish refugee children. So my father goes to Chateau de la Guette. The picture on the top right and the bottom left, the face in the red circle, that's my dad. And the picture on the bottom right was a picture from 1989. The La Guette kids, they had a reunion. They called it their 50-year reunion. My father couldn't go, but they sent him pictures. They are living all over the world. I don't know how many of them are still alive now, but they were living all over the world, and they kept in touch. And almost all of them survived. There were 10 that didn't. There were 10 that were sent to Auschwitz, and they died there. But almost all of them went on to live productive lives. So it sounds like, he's he's okay at La Guette. Like he said, there's food, he's well taken care of. And in May of 1940, Germany invades France. All right, so first of all, a word about my dad. By May 1940, that's 15 months after he got there, he's not at La Guette anymore. He had already moved around. He was sent to 2 different schools, and he's now at this other boarding school outside of Paris. So Germany invades France, and when Germany first invaded France, they did not occupy the whole country. So if you look at the top right at that map of France, there's that white line, that's the demarcation line. So Germany occupied everything north of that line and everything west of that line to the Atlantic. Everything underneath that line, south of that line, was called Vichy France because it was the Vichy government. I mean, they were basically German collaborators, but they were still French. Nobody wants to live under German occupation. People are trying to leave. The picture in the top middle is a picture of a train platform in Paris after Germany invades France. And I don't know, I look at that picture and I can sense the frenzy and the chaos. People are trying to get out. Let's listen to my father talk about his experience, what happened.
The director of the school, or the owner of the school, owned an estate near Poitiers, which is sort of halfway between Paris and Bordeaux. When the Germans were basically at the doors of Paris, he decided to evacuate the whole school to Poitiers, and we took the train from Paris to Poitiers. It was quite an experience because everybody was fleeing, and the trains were sort of crowded. I mean, there was barely room to stand, and they were slow, but we finally made it.
So they get to Poitiers. The problem with Poitiers is it's still in the occupied portion of France. So it really wasn't that much more desirable to be there than to be in Paris. So they only stayed there a short while, several months, and then the director took everybody back to Paris. By this time, La Guette was closing, and they redistributed all the kids to different places. My father got sent to a town called La Boule, which is in Vichy France, the unoccupied portion of France. And he went to a place called Hôtel des Anglais, where he worked in the kitchen as a cook, which, if you knew my father, makes absolutely no sense. And I'm convinced there's a whole generation of Frenchmen in La Boule who have no idea what good food is. But he's there. It's the end of 1941 now. The war is raging. Life is tough. There's rationing. Let's listen to my father talk about life in La Boule and getting through the winter.
It was a very harsh winter for us. Food was severely rationed, and the things that were not rationed, just like vegetables, just were not available. Then it was very cold and snowy, lots of snow, very cold in winter, and there wasn't enough coal or wood to heat the place. We had minimal heating in the dining room and in the bedroom and in the classrooms. We had zero heat in the bedrooms, and of course we were constantly hungry. There just wasn't enough to eat. One of the people we were 5 or 6 in each bedroom. one of the people in our room was a very tall and strong guy, and I remember he once went during the day, in the evening rather, into the mountains and into one of the barns, and he stole a 50 kilo bag of oats that were kept there to feed the horses. And he brought it back, and we were eating the oats, which were horse meal. And I remember I had a shoebox, and I filled that with oats, and I kept it under my bed.
Horse meal, they ate horse meal, right? You did what you had to do to survive. 50 kilograms is 110 pounds, if you don't know, so this is a pretty hefty bag of oats. So my father, he's going to escape into Switzerland, and I'm gonna take you through that. But before that, he moved around. He left La Broboule. He went to a couple other places, came back to La Broboule. But and he ends up at the end of 1942, he's going to escape into Switzerland. But I want you to get a sense of what's happening in France while he's living in France. So he gets there in March 39. About 2 years later, in May of 41, they start arresting Jews in France. So if you're walking down the street or riding your bicycle, you get stopped, asked for your papers. If you're Jewish, you get arrested, and you most likely got sent to a transit camp called Drancy. That's D-R-A-N-C-Y. It's still there. It's about halfway between Paris and Charles de Gaulle Airport. In March of 42, the deportations start. And my father, he's in France until October 42. So these are the first 20 deportations from France to the camps. And these all happened when my father was living there. And you can see they all went to Auschwitz. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And there are about 1,000 people per convoy. So my he's really in hiding when he's in France. Like starting in May 41, if he gets picked up, like it's over. He doesn't talk about that. You don't get a sense that he's afraid when you're listening to his videos, but he had to know Jews were getting arrested, and he had to know they were being sent off to the east. Probably didn't know what happened when they got there. So let's talk about what happened when they got there. The Germans had about 40,000 concentration camps, and they were all different types. So they had work camps where you would go and you were assigned different kinds of work. Maybe you were assembling airplanes for the military. Maybe you worked in agriculture out in the fields. You had some job to do. There were sex slave camps where they sent women and forced them to have sex with German soldiers. There were transit camps where they aggregated Jews, getting them ready for deportation. So I just told you about this one in Drancy. There was in Holland, there was Westerbork. So there were these transit camps. And then there were death camps. And there were 6 death camps. Auschwitz was one of the death camps. And the death camps were built with the sole purpose of murdering Jews. And what would happen at Auschwitz, the train would pull in, everybody would get off the train, a very small number of people would be selected for work, and everybody else got sent to the showers, which were not showers, they were gas chambers, and they were murdered. So yes, there were people that survived Auschwitz, but if you were sent there, Auschwitz was pretty much a death sentence. And I think by the time it was said and done, between 900,000 and 1 million Jews died at Auschwitz. So my father, France isn't safe for Jewish kids anymore. Germany now occupies all of France. There's no more demarcation zone. And my father and 3 friends, they get on a train to Annemasse. Annemasse is in France, but it's right on the border with Switzerland. It's about 6 or 7 miles from Geneva. They have fake papers, counterfeit papers, and when they get to Enfants, they're met by, my father called him a guide, who took them back to a safe house where they hid out until 2, 3 in the morning. Then he took them to the border where they crossed into Switzerland. My father said the train ride was harrowing. Police, soldiers were constantly walking up and down the aisles of the train checking your papers. He said you couldn't get out of the train station in Enfants without showing your papers. It was a harrowing ride. So now they cross into Switzerland. Let's listen to my father talk about that.
Anyhow, we took off our shoes and socks and pulled up our pants, and we got across the barbed wire and that little river, and on the other hand we sat down, we put back our shoes and socks, and at that point then we were already in Switzerland, at the other side of the river, Switzerland. At that point we were caught by a Swiss border guard. As I said, there were 4 of us. He took us to a sort of entry post where we were asked our names and date of birth. We had nothing on us. In other words, no baggage, just the clothes that we were wearing. We had 0 money, neither French nor Swiss. We had no papers whatsoever. So whatever information we gave them, they had to accept at face value. They asked for our date of birth, and 3 of us were born in 25 or 26, and 1 was born in 1927. And they announced that they would not keep children over the age of 16, and the boss asked one of the border guards to take us back to the border and to ship us back across the border into France. They kept the 4th one, who was born in 1927. He took us back to the border. Turn off a second. So he took us back to the border and he said, this is France across that little river, and you need to go back. Geneva is in this direction, and I don't know what you're going to do when I'm on my way back. So we waited till he had gotten back, and then we headed towards Geneva.
So a lot to unpack there. First of all, after this harrowing train ride and they crossed the border, hearing the captain say, you have to go back to France, can't imagine what that was like for them. They had nowhere to go in France. They had no money. They had no place. Going back to France almost certainly meant they would have been picked up by the Germans and deported to Auschwitz. So word about this border guard who saved their lives and let them stay in Switzerland. There were a lot of non-Jewish people that did a lot of wonderful and courageous things and saved a lot of Jewish lives during the war. And we have a word for them. We call them upstanders. And if you go around the museum, the exhibit, you'll see that word a lot. And this guard, for me, is a great example of an upstander. And I think about him. I don't know who he was. I'm still trying to find out. But I wonder, did he go home that night and have dinner and tell his wife, oh, I did this incredible thing. I saved the lives of these 3 boys. Or did he have dinner and listen to the radio and go to bed and never said a word about it? I wonder what he thought about what he did. So they hike into Geneva. They had the name of a pastor in Geneva who they knew had helped Jewish refugee children. They showed up at his church early in the morning. He let them in. He gave them breakfast. My father said they never knew there was that much food anywhere in the world. And he told them to go to the police station, to be 15 years old, throw away any papers you have, and he gave them money to take the tram, and that's your story. So the reason he sent them to the police station, the child refugee program in Switzerland during the war was administered by the police. So he goes to the police. They send them to this stadium where they were housing kids, and they slept on straw mattresses, and they gave them kind of a mess kit to eat. And they spent about a week there, and then they distributed the kids to different places. My father, because of his experience as a chef, was sent to a children's home where he worked as a cook. And even though he's in Switzerland and he's safe, he's not going to be deported, he's still a refugee, and he does not have the rights of a Swiss citizen. So every time he went to a new place, he had to sign an agreement that said he wouldn't leave the city without police permission. He couldn't congregate with groups larger than whatever the number was. He had a curfew he had to abide by. So he had to abide by a lot of rules and restrictions in Switzerland. And he ended up staying in Switzerland until the war ended in 1945. And in those 3 years, he had been sent to about 10 different places. He lived in about 10 different facilities. This is a letter from one of the children's homes he worked at back to the police. And the paragraph that's exploded says that we have this kid here, and his nerves are so shot from the experience that he has, he's not able to do the job we have for him. But he's a nice kid, and he's an intelligent kid, and we'd like to keep him. We'd like to give him a different job, and we're going to reduce his salary to this. Could we have permission to do that? And the police said, yes, you can do that. But the reason I include this is, again, I've read through so many pages of documents. This is the only thing I've ever seen that is kind of validates that this was a traumatic experience for my father. I mean, you listen to him talk, and he's very matter of fact. He's maybe a little detached. There's no emotion. Great recall, immaculate recall of dates and times and places, but there's not really a lot of feeling behind it. So the war ends in 1945. My grandparents, meanwhile, when they got out of Germany in 1939, they went to England. So while my father's traipsing around France and Switzerland, they're living in London. The war ends. He's 19 years old now. He hasn't seen his parents in 6 years. You would have thought he'd go to London and reunite with them, but he didn't. He went to Palestine. He worked on a kibbutz that grew oranges, and he absolutely hated it. He said it was like more communist than living in Russia. But he spent about 9 months there, and then in 1946 finally went to London and reunited with his parents. He's 20 years old now. He hasn't seen them in 7 years. Can't imagine what that reunion was like. And my father, being a pretty stoic, unemotional guy, I never really got any good information about that. So he spends 2 years in London living with his parents. He learns English, which he didn't know. He had various jobs. And in 1948, he came to America. He came alone to New York City, to northern Manhattan, a part of the city called Washington Heights, which was kind of the center of German Jewish refugee life. And he got an apartment, and then his parents came later on. The story has a happy ending, right? My father, he built a great life for himself and his family here in America. And the fact that he got saved, there are now 6 of us walking around. So I have a brother, I have 2 kids, and I have 2 grandkids. And these are some pictures of the family. And my kids are as babies in the bottom center. And then the top, the second from the left, those are my kids at my daughter's law school graduation. And and then my grandkids on the right. So we're walking around because he got saved. Okay, one last thing, and then I'll take questions. There is this way of commemorating and remembering Holocaust victims. And they're called Stolperstein, which means stumbling stone. And a stumbling stone you can see I'm holding one in that picture on the left. It's a 4-inch square with a brass plaque on top, and it actually gets installed in the sidewalk outside the last place the person lived voluntarily. And there are a lot of metaphors and meaning about the Stolperstein. Like there used to be this anti-Semitic trope in German. If you were walking down the street and you stumbled on a cobblestone, they would say, oh, a Jew is buried there. And well, now we're kind of metaphorically burying a Jew there. Also, the guy who came up with this idea, the artist Gunter Demnig, said that we have all these Holocaust museums and memorials, but you choose if you go there. You don't have to go visit them if you don't want. These are randomly placed around the city, so you can't avoid them. So about 2 years ago, my brother and I went to Ludwigshafen. We installed 3 Stolperstein, one for my dad and one for each of my grandparents. So let me just play this little quick video for you.
Das Land so sehr nicht liebte, von Anfang an gewillt zu gehen. Ihnen manche sind schon fort, es ist besser, ich doch müsste mit dem eigenen Messer meine Wurzeln aus der Erde drehen.
Could you get one of us? I got to tell you, the Germans couldn't have been more supportive. They came out in force, totally behind us. The irony of the whole experience was the mayor of Ludwigshafen actually drove my brother and I to the residence. And we're sitting in the back of the mayor's car, and all I could think about was, in 1939, your office sent my grandfather a letter that he had to shut down his business because Jews weren't allowed, and now he was driving us to celebrate my father and my grandparents. It was, like I said, like the irony of ironies. Okay, very last thing, I just want to tell you, I don't have a slide for it, but I wrote a book about all this about 6 months ago. It's called The Quiet Strength of Resilience. It's on Amazon. If you're interested and you want to learn a little more, please pick it up. But thank you very much, I think, for being here and your attention, and I think we're going to take questions.
Thank you so much, Ron. Okay, we're going to start with some questions that came in online, and we have staff going up and down. If you have questions, please get them your index cards. So the first question is, have you been back to visit the site of the jewelry store, and is it still standing?
I have been back there. In fact, the jewelry store is right across the street from where we installed the Stolperstein. It is not still standing. They tore down everything, and there's kind of a big modern building there. So it is gone, but the apartment building where my father lived right across the street is still standing and intact.
Okay. The next question, and it's a related question, is did your family undergo any restitution efforts to regain the property before it was torn down or to be compensated by the government in the decades following the war?
Yeah, restitution. Okay, there's a lot here. The Germans paid billions and billions of dollars in restitution, and my father didn't really get anything because he didn't really lose anything. He was a kid. So my grandfather, he did two things. The Germans either paid you a lump sum or kind of an annuity for life. And my grandfather wanted the annuity, and the German government said, no, lump sum for you, because whatever you lost, you recreated for yourself when you went to England. My grandfather said, that's ridiculous, and he ended up suing the German government, saying, I'm entitled to the annuity for life. And my grandfather won the lawsuit and got that money. They filed another lawsuit. My grandparents also, I didn't really talk about this, they owned another apartment building in Ludwigshafen. And they sold it under duress in 1938 and for about half the value. And my grandmother would talk about Nazis coming around saying, you should sell it to us for what you can get because they're just going to take it away from you if you don't. So they ended up selling it for about half its value. And after the war, the German government said any contracts that were entered into under duress are null and void. So my grandparents sued the Hodges, that's the couple that bought the building. They sued to get the building back, and they won. The only problem was in 1944, the Allies had bombed the building. So basically they got back the land and a pile of rubble, but I mean, I think it was a victory for justice. And then I'm not sure what happened after that. I'm sure they just sold that to some developer, but I don't know. I think they felt like they got justice.
Was your father able to stay in touch with your grandparents while living in France, or was communication cut off once the war began?
Yeah, that's a good question. So they almost always knew where each other was. My father knew his parents were in London, and they could write letters to each other, except until when the war started, there was no more mail between France and England. And so what they did, there was a woman in Switzerland, they called her Aunt Betty. And the kids would write letters and send them to Aunt Betty in Switzerland, and Aunt Betty would then forward them to London, and then the responses would come back the same way. So pretty much the whole time my father is moving around, they knew where he was. There was a period of about 6 months where they lost track of him, and they were really worried, but then the communications picked up again.
Okay. While living at Chateau Laguette, were the people who were living there ever worried about bombings or flyovers?
My father never mentioned anything about being worried about that in Paris. But when they left Paris and went down to Poitiers, there were flyovers and there was strafings by the Luftwaffe, and they were very concerned about that when they were in Poitiers, and he said they really couldn't go outside when they were there.
Okay. Did your father ever meet, again, those who helped him, the resistors, the rescuers, and we know that he didn't meet the border guard?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my father, I used to ask him all the time, he didn't know anything about, I used to say, well, who was taking care of you and who gave you money for food and clothes and you're traveling around? And he did not know any of those questions, any of those answers. And I think it was by design that he didn't know because they didn't want him to be able to give anybody up if he was arrested by the Germans. Through the research I've done and a lot of help I've gotten from people at the museum, I know who all those people are, and so I know a lot more about my father's story than he ever knew. And you said it right. It was this organization, OSE, Oeuvre de Secours, Enfants, and they were a really interesting organization because they operated sort of above board and openly, saving children. but they also worked with the French underground and the resistance. So they were playing both sides of the fence.
Okay. Did your father ever return to his hometown?
Yeah, he did. My father, he did go back. He used to go to Germany a lot on business anyway, and he was not one of those Jews that would never go to Germany or wouldn't buy a German car or anything like that. My father felt that the Germans today, they're not the ones who are to be held responsible for what happened. So he was fine going to Germany.
Okay. When did you begin sharing your father's story, and why did you begin sharing your father's story?
I don't know how long it's been, maybe 9 years. I started doing it. I got a call from someone at the museum, and they wanted to know if I'd be interested in being developed as a speaker like I'm doing today with you. And I said yes, and I came in and I met with them. And it was great. I love telling the story. I feel, well, with the incredible rise in anti-Semitism and Jewish hate, I feel like it's really important, more important now than ever to tell the story. And also, whenever I tell the story, I feel like I'm honoring my father, and it feels really good. And through my connection to the museum, people like Sarah and Charlotte started asking me questions. It got me thinking. I didn't have any of these documents when I started. I had the video because I recorded my father 20 years ago, but I didn't have any of these documents. I knew nothing. And they started asking me questions, and they kind of put me on a path, and then I was like a wild man jumping down all these rabbit holes trying to see what information I can get. And now I have like hundreds and hundreds of pages about documenting my family's story in Europe. So I'm really grateful to the museum for all the help.
Was your father's Jewish faith shaken by the process that he went through?
Yeah, I don't know. My father used to say that as a kid they were fairly observant, that they used to go to synagogue every week and they celebrated all the holidays. And then I don't know, when I knew my father, he wasn't interested in even being a member of a synagogue. He had a very, very strong Jewish identity, don't get me wrong, but not religiously observant. So I don't know if it was his experience, or my father's a really logical guy, and I don't know, somehow faith doesn't always fit into that framework. So, but I don't know if it was his experience that soured him on Judaism. I don't think it was. I think it's just where he landed.
Okay. Did your father ever talk about what he thought of his time in France and what he thought about the French people?
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's a yes.
He did. I think somewhere in my father's heart, my father's very grateful to France and the French, and he feels like they really saved his life. So my father, by the time he died, I mean, obviously you could hear he spoke English like a native. He was very fluent in French, and of course he spoke German, but he loved speaking French more than anything. Like he moved to Dallas after my mother died, and he joined. There are a bunch of French expat groups here, and they have meetings and potluck dinners. And my father got involved because he just loved speaking French. At the same time, he would make a lot of jokes about the French, but he also liked to make jokes about the Germans. Like, I don't know. Do you remember the TV show Hogan's Heroes? Mm-hmm. Like, my father would watch that and howl. Like, he loved it. So. But he loved going to France. He loved the food. He seemed to have really good interactions with people. And I do think in his heart he really thought France and the French saved his life.
Okay. Final question. What gives you hope that history will not repeat itself and that something like the Holocaust will never happen again?
Wow. Well, Yeah.
Honest answer, Ron.
Huh?
Honest answer.
Honest answer. Well, I used to believe it could never happen here and it could never happen again, and I'm not so sure now. So I think it's unlikely that it takes the same form of just let's go murder 6 million Jews, but I am really fearful that we're going to start, at some point, we're going to see legislation that actually affects Jews, and it's really worrisome.
Okay. Thank you, Ron, for your talk, and thank you all for being with us today and listening to Ron and his father Charles's story. For those of you in the audience who would like to meet him, I'm sure he will be willing to stay here a little bit so you can come down the ramp and say hello. And we hope that you all have an enjoyable rest of your summer and safe travels home. Thank you so much.